Yeah, I'm recording now.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. We continue with our informational sessions, and we have partnered with the ICSC, and Roberto Pagan has gladly agreed to come and speak to us about our salaries. And so I am not going to take a lot of time. Roberto was here for the first informational session. So I think, Roberto, I'm going to hand over to you. Perhaps just give a short introduction of yourself for those who weren't here last time. This meeting is being recorded. Please put any questions in the chat. We will take questions at the end of the session. And so if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We will also send a copy of the presentation that Roberto makes, together with any answers to the questions that you've asked, for those who were not physically present in the meeting. So without further ado, I'm handing over to Roberto. Roberto, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for this invitation. I would like to acknowledge the importance, I think, of this initiative for professional staff. And I think you're lucky to have such good coordinators for these initiatives. And I'm happy to be sharing some information about post-adjustment and rental subsidy with you today. Just a brief introduction about myself. I'm Roberto Pagan. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Cost of Living Division in the ICSC. And I'm a statistician. So what I do essentially stems from that type of background. But I found myself in these past years to work in an area that cross-linking with a lot of HR components. And so I understand that sometimes the type of topics that we deal with when we talk about post-adjustment, although they are technical, they must be kind of bridged to a much wider audience because they are of importance to all. And so what I'm trying to do today is to go a little bit deeper on post-adjustment and subsidy.
About lessons learned and how they could be replicated. One in particular.
So a little bit more, a little bit deeper than what we had as overall presentation during the first session. Let me now share my screen. Let's see if I can make it share screen and screen 2. And that should be it.
Roberta, it's not sharing on our side. Oh, here it comes.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you. Right.
I have to say I'm more familiar with Teams than Zoom, so bear with me about it. So okay, now we've got this deeper dive on the compilation of the post-adjustment index and the setting of the post-adjustment multiplier. So during the first session, we had an overview about a number of topics. These touched upon the Nobel principle, the governance of the compensation system, how base salary, staff assessment, and post-adjustment are linked. We had a very, very high-level introduction to the concept of what post-adjustment is and of the operational rules that govern the setting of the post-adjustment multiplier and the differences between post-adjustment index and post-adjustment multiplier. Those were also discussed. We discussed also the differences between Group 1 and Group 2 duty stations. Group 1s are headquarters or similar duty stations in North America, Europe, and then also in Asia and the Pacific. And Group 2, which are the broader group of field duty stations. And we discussed also in say high-level terms the differences between benchmarking, so when a post-adjustment index or a multiplier is established, and their updating over time, and the effects of inflation and currency movements, because both contribute to the evolution of the post-adjustment index and of the multiplier. So because all of this all of this was presented, but at the same time, we also have a booklet on post-adjustment. And all of this was is covered in the first 13 pages of the booklet. So when you go to our website and you look for post-adjustment, you can easily find the booklet. And for any information that is more refined, more or deeper than what I'm going to provide you today, you're warmly invited to consult the booklet, because essentially everything that I'm going to say today is already there covered, even though there are some details in the current version of the booklet that do not yet reflect the latest changes to some aspects in the compilation of the PAI or in the determination of the multiplier that have been introduced with this latest 2021 round of surveys. So we are to update the booklet, and we are going to do that hopefully soon, so that it's going to reflect exactly what type of methodologies behind for the existing round of surveys. So what we are going to cover today are the compilation of the post-adjustment index, both in its benchmarking, so the compilation of the post-adjustment index at the time of a survey, and also the updating of the index over time. We are going to cover the post-adjustment multiplier, what you see in your statements of earnings and deductions or the pay slips is the multiplier, is not the index. And so we will see how the PAM is determined when a survey is implemented and how the PAM evolves in between surveys. And we are also going to touch the policy overview of rental subsidy, which is an important component of compensation. And especially we're going to see what it is and what it isn't, and how it relates to post-adjustment, because we are going to see that it is strongly interlinked within the post-adjustment methodology. Oh, sorry, the post-adjustment system. And we are going to touch upon the booklet. So if you want to know everything about the benchmarking of post-adjustment, you can see that in the pages 13 to 32 of the booklet. And when we talk about the post-adjustment index and its benchmarking, we need to refer to the 5 major components that are behind the index. And these are the housing, the in-area excluding housing, the medical insurance, out of area, and pension contribution components. And you see here the acronyms HIA, HMI, etc. These are the acronyms that we use in our formulas or in our references. So I highlighted them in red so that it's easier for you to see when we talk later about them, so that you can refer to them better. So for each of these components, we need to establish a weight and we need to establish an index. Both are essential to the compilation of the post-adjustment index. And when we talk about weights, most of the weights that are attributed to these components, they are based on the survey on staff expenditures that we conduct. Participate, you receive the invitation by email, you get to the online questionnaire, and you start providing your information on housing expenses and every other expense that you incur, either on a frequent basis or a less frequent basis for annual expenditures or even less frequent types of expenditures. So that survey essentially provides the set of weights that are used in the compilation of the index. But some components have a weight that is determined either administratively or quasi-administratively. For example, pension contribution. All our calculations are made making reference to an average midpoint of the scale staff, P4 step 6. And so when we talk about that type of positioning in the salary scale, P4 step 6, we are able for a P4 step 6 to calculate, even without survey, how much a staff in that grade and step would have to contribute to the pension fund. There is no ambiguity. There's no need of a survey for that. So there is an administrative determination of the weight. For medical insurance, we do need information from the survey, but we actually just require the distribution of staff, of the staff population in a duty station by organizations, because in that way, we will be able to have an average of the different amounts of staff contribution to the organization supplied medical plan that is used to calculate the weight of the medical insurance. In addition to that, we have now, as part of the methodology, also the inclusion of expenses for supplementary medical insurance that are beyond the that are purchased individually and out of their own pocket by staff. We have a question in the questionnaire where we can get that information, and an average for the duty station is added to the calculated medical insurance weight. So we can determine with more accuracy how much the staff on average spend on medical insurance. Everything else, the weights for the Autoviria component, which is the component that represents expenditures incurred outside the country of the duty station. So if you are based in Italy, the expenditures that are incurred outside of Italy are captured in the questionnaire within the Autoviria component. And also, very importantly, the expenditures on housing and the which are rent or utilities or repairs and maintenance of the house, and the expenditures on the in-area excluding housing, which is that component of the index where we catch the expenditures of staff on day-to-day purchases for groceries, for clothing, for entertainment, travel, etc. So the primary source for these weights is the survey that the staff participate to, and the results of that is used for the determination of the importance of these components within the index. On the other hand, we also have to compile indices, individual indices for these components, and within these components also for lower level indices. But the sources for information for the compilation of these indices come primarily from the market. And in the case of housing, we do have market prices for everything except for other housing costs. Other housing costs are obtained from the survey on staff expenditures. These other housing costs are an aggregation of various and heterogeneous types of expenditures for which it is very difficult to get outside the market price. And so instead of using market prices, we use the staff supplied information. In the case of in-area excluding housing, the index is built also using market prices for everything in that component except domestic services. In the case of domestic services, the information is also supplied by the staff, by the questionnaire. For medical insurance, we receive every year updated plans and costs for these plans from the United Nations Common System Organizations. And we are able to calculate the reference type of coverage that is used in the compilation of the index. And in the case of Autoviria, the Autoviria component, the index is built using US dollarized CPIs of 26 countries. And it's a weighted average. It's weighted because every number of years we conduct an Autoviria survey, a global Autoviria survey throughout the whole system and all duty stations. And we ask staff to let us know what are the countries outside of their existing duty station where they incur most of their expenditures. And then we are able to determine how many of these countries are needed to cover at least 75% of the global Autoviria expenditures. And these are the countries that are in the basket. So the next time we are going to have a global Autoviria survey, this number of CPIs, dollarized CPIs, could change. It could become lower or higher depending on the depending on the responses that we get from the out of area survey. But in that case, in this case now, we are using 26 such CPIs, total CPIs. In the case of pension contribution, the index is very simple. It's the ratio of how much staff contribute today at any duty station versus how much staff contributed at the beginning of the survey round in New York. So it is essentially a temporal index. But it's easy to calculate because it's based on the pensionable remuneration scale, which is updated periodically, I would say almost every year. So this is the case for Group 1 duty stations, for headquarters and similar duty stations. For Group 2 or field duty station, there is a slight difference when it comes to housing, because in the case of housing, the source of information for the compilation of the index also comes, that source is also the survey on staff expenditures. So instead of using market prices, we use information supplied by staff on rents or utilities or other housing costs. So this is the formula that we use to compile. Sometimes I hear voices from the participants. If you can mute, please. This is the formula that is used to compile the post-adjustment index. As you can see, I mean, I'm not sure whether you are familiar or not with index compilation, but essentially this is a arithmetic weighted average of the 5 major components. But within the components, we may have, for example, in the case of in area excluding housing, we may have a geometric aggregation. We have an arithmetic aggregation within housing, and the compilation of the other 3 components is a little bit beyond, I think, the scope for this session, but you can definitely see exactly how these are calculated if you refer to pages 68 and 69 of the booklet. Once we compile the cost of living index for a duty station, we have to multiply that for the rebasing factor. And that will give us the PAI, the post-adjustment index. What the rebasing factor is, the rebasing factor is a scaling factor. So that if you have a cost of living index that is 100, that means that you have exactly the same cost of living at a certain point in time as New York had at the beginning of the survey round. So the rebasing factor simply scales up your post-adjustment index in order to have essentially the same level of remuneration that you would have had in New York at the beginning of the round. So if your cost of living index turns out to be higher than 100, then the PAI that you receive as duty station is a PAI that will lead to a higher level of remuneration than New York. Whereas if the cost of living is lower, the PAI would lead to a lower level of remuneration of New York, because the principle is that of equality of purchasing power, not equality of salaries. That is the principle that governs the post-adjustment system. Now we may focus a little bit more on the in-area excluding housing component, which is the component that is most often cited, most often looked at by all stakeholders. And that is because it is comprised of all expenditures that staff and their households incur that are visible, that are recognized, that are typical, like for food, for clothing, for beverages, for health, travel, etc. So we have a hierarchy within that component of the post-adjustment index. And if you start from the bottom, you can see that we got 296 items. In reality, now there are 300. So we need to update that number, but we have 300 items. And these are items such as rice or bread or milk. And we aggregate them on a hierarchical fashion from the bottom to the top throughout various layers that include the basic heading ratios after the items, basic heading ratios, subgroups, major groups, and the area excluding housing index. So there is this process of aggregation that takes place, but the starting point is that of the items. So for these items, the benchmarking requires collecting price information. And I'll give you now an example. What we do is to collect the prices in the market in specific stores that are defined in a list that is defined by the local survey committee and the survey coordinator at the duty station, taking into account the stores that are patronized or likely to be patronized by the international staff. So sometimes these coincide with stores that are available to the whole population. In other cases, especially in field duty stations, they may be different. So we target the stores that are patronized by the staff population. But at the same time, we need also to price items that are comparable to items that are also priced in New York, so that we achieve as close as possible a like-to-like comparison. That's why when we talk about the price data collection, which is the other big pillar of the survey, we need to go to the stores that are patronized by the staff, but we need to collect items that are comparable to those that are also priced in New York, so that we can compute a price ratio. And that's how we define them. You can see here in the case of milk that we target well-known brands, and we target a certain range of volume expressed either in liter or in imperial units. It has to be unskimmed cow milk with certain amount of fat content. And for this item, we need to collect we need to record the store. We need to record the unit of measure, the quantity. We need to record the price, plus additional notes that help us in understanding whether that is a valid price quotation or not. So that is what we do when we collect the price data. And this is an example which is actually a real one of a distribution of prices in euros that you can see in the matrix here across various stores for the quotes on milk that were collected in Rome when we had the survey back in 2021. Now, all of these prices in euros, in order to be comparable to the prices in dollars that were collected in New York for milk, for that exactly same type of milk, they need to be converted in case they are collected with different size, different volumes, and they need to be converted into dollars. So once the conversion is done, we obtain the United States dollars unit price. In this case, the standard reference unit is 1 liter. And so these are the collected prices in euro are transformed in dollar prices for 1 liter of milk. And when you average these, and we average using the geometric mean, you obtain a certain average price for milk at the duty station. This price for milk at the duty station is compared with the price of milk in New York that was recorded with the survey in New York for the same type of milk. And the ratio of these two average prices provide us an item level ratio. This item level ratio of 0.779 means that milk in Rome in November 2021 was slightly cheaper. It was essentially 78% of the price of milk in New York in July 2021. So that is a price ratio. And we do, and we aim to calculate these price ratios for essentially all the items in the basket, all these 300 items in the basket. We need to collect price information and establish these ratios. But this is only one ratio of the many that we in fact have. You can see this 0.779 for milk fresh and skimmed, item 00801, as part of a set of other item ratios that compose a basic heading. And when you average geometrically without weight these item ratios, some are lower, some are higher, you obtain a basic heading ratio. So this is a step up in the hierarchy that we have seen in the previous slide. So this basic heading ratio is a mix of is an average of item ratios for dairy products and oils or fats. And we have basic headings that are about cereals, that are about fresh fruits or fresh vegetables, various types of meats in the case of food. But we also have basic headings for clothing for men, which is made up of items such as shirts, suits, trousers, etc. In the case of clothing for women, we do have skirts, we have, again, blouses, we have a number of items for clothing for women, and so forth. So we do have this aggregation from item to basic heading level. And so we proceed in the hierarchy, aggregating them from the point of basic heading level ratios and up to the hierarchy, up to the in-area excluding housing index. We can use weights because these weights come from the survey, but we don't have weights for individual items. We have weights for basic headings. So once we establish the post-adjustment index, and again, I would invite you to see in the booklet the aggregation that is, how it is made. Once we have all these prices and we achieve the in-area excluding housing, once we achieve and we calculate the indices for the other components, we can compile the post-adjustment index in this hierarchical fashion from the bottom to the top. But that is a measurement at the time of the survey. We need also to update that measurement over time. And what we do to update that measurement over time is to update it with different approaches. So in the pages 33 and 34 of the booklet, the updating of the post-adjustment index is discussed and presented. But one important point is that all weights, when we update from the month of the survey onward, the weights remain the same until they are reset with the next place-to-place survey. But the indices are updated. So weights remain the same and indices are updated. And the way and the sources for updating such indices are different. In the case of housing and in-area excluding housing, we use disaggregated consumer price index information that we obtain from the national statistical offices of the countries. In the case of Italy, it's Istat that provides the disaggregated information on inflation. And we have several dozens of such disaggregated CPI series. I cannot remember now how many because they change from duty station to duty station. But what we tend to do is to have a periodic check when we launch a new round. If more refined series are available, we use them. So we use in the updating of the housing disaggregated CPIs, but in the case of field duty station, for group 2 duty station, we use the evolution of market. In the case of rents, we use the evolution of market rents from a specific separate survey that is conducted by a partner agency. But in the case of group 2, we have annual housing surveys that are used to calculate an implicit inflation factor. But at the same time, we use exchange rates from the Treasury, because ours is a system based on a global US dollar scale of remuneration. But given the methodology, we also need to update the ratios that are obtained in a different currency with the changing and the changing values of the exchange rates. So if you have a certain price that is collected in euro, and the euro later on, after the collection of that price, appreciates against the US dollar, the ratio will appreciate too, because it is updated with the exchange rate. If the euro appreciates against the US dollar, you will need more dollars to keep buying that same item. Therefore, we need to update upward the basic heading ratios. But at the same time, if the euro depreciates against the dollar, that has a depressing effect on the basic heading ratios. And the same goes for in excluding housing indices. In the case of medical insurance, the updating requires updated information of the medical plans from each of the organizations that participated in, whose staff participated in the survey. In the case of Autoviria, we use total CPIs from national statistical offices and again, exchange rates from the Treasury, whereas for the last component, pension contribution, there's no effect of exchange rates. That is an entirely US dollar-based component. So the updating of the index for pension contribution does not use any exchange rate. So this is how we update a basic heading ratio. This is the formula that is used. And as you can see, for any point in time after, say that the survey takes place at time t, and we want to have the basic heading ratio updated at time t plus k, we take the basic heading ratio at time t, and then we multiply by these two components. Let's see in detail what happens. So we had that basic heading ratio of 0.737 for dairy products and oils and fats that was determined at the time of the survey. Now, let us imagine that there was inflation between time t and time t plus k. So that inflation is measured with the specific disaggregated CPI. And that, let's assume that at the time of the survey, minus 2 months, that index was 102. And then at the time of the reference, minus 2 months, we have 109. So there was inflation. The measurement of inflation for that specific group of items shows that there was an increase in prices. So the inflation effect in this case is the ratio between the two indices, and we can say if we have that type of evolution, the inflation effect is 1.068. At the same time, the currency evolution as provided by the UN Treasury has an effect on the updating. And we may assume, just in case, that at time t, the exchange rate, in this case of the euro versus the dollar, was 0.911, and later on it becomes 0.931. That means that $1 buys at time t plus k more euros. So there was a depreciation of the euro in this particular case with these numbers used in the example. And so what happens is that the currency effect is lower than 1. So the updated index for that basic heading ratio is going to be subject to the contemporaneous effect of inflation, local inflation, but same time currency depreciation. So, which is one of the reasons why the evolution of the PAI does not follow the local inflation one-on-one. It follows an effect that is jointly determined by the local inflation plus exchange rate effects. What we do every month is to incorporate the various sources of inflation and the evolution of the local currency into the post-adjustment index. But the evolution of inflation, local inflation, or other sources of inflation is different within the various components. This is a split of the overall weight for the post-adjustment index for Rome, as determined on the basis of the last place-to-place survey. As you can see, we have weights for each of these 5 components, and the biggest components are local ones, housing and in area excluding housing. But there are also non-local components in the determination of the post-adjustment index. Pension contribution is totally non-local. Medical insurance is also non-local because the evolution of the medical plans does not depend on the specificity of the evolution on health services in the duty station, because these are medical plans that essentially reflect the evolution of costs incurred normally by the pot of costs that are supported by the medical plan over various duty stations. So they're not duty station specific. And the out of area component is also by definition determined by these expenditures that we incur outside the country of the duty station. So it is not local, but there is some effects of local inflation. In the case of Rome, for example, but that is not the same for other duty stations, what we can see that there is full effect of local inflation in the housing and in the area excluding housing components. So local inflation counts a lot, but it doesn't count entirely in the evolution of the post-adjustment index. It doesn't count for 100%. It counts for a good share, but not 100%. In the case of medical insurance, there's no effect of local inflation in the evolution of these medical plans. And also in the case of pension contribution. There is for Rome, and specifically for Rome, but this is not the same for other duty stations, a little effect of local inflation in the overall out of area index, because the share of expenditures that are incurred by staff around the world who are not in Italy, but they are incurred in Italy is 4%, approximately 4%. So there is a little bit of local inflation that also, Italian local inflation, that determines the out of area index. Whereas we see here that the effect of local currency is also differentiated. There's no effect of local currency at all for pension contribution. There is full effect on the index for medical insurance, and there is I would say a high percentage of effect of local currency in the out of area index, not necessarily only because of the presence of Italy in the determination of the out of area index, but because there are other countries that are using the euro that are also in the index, in these 26 CPIs that are dollarized. And therefore, what happens is that if you sum up the overall amount of weight for these individual countries, France, Germany, or others, then you end up with a strong effect of the euro on on the evolution of the auto-video index. But in general, so we may expect that the primary point here is that there is never a one-to-one relationship in the evolution between local inflation and the post-adjustment index, and that is because first, not all components in the index are local, and so the weight is less than 100% for local components. And secondly, because in addition to local inflation, we also have to factor in the evolution of the local currency. And sometimes what happens is that if there is contemporaneous inflation but depreciation of the local currency, the two can offset each other in full or in part. But if there is at the same time inflation and appreciation of the local currency, we may have a higher than inflation evolution of the post-adjustment index. So the two needs to be considered, both of them need to be considered. Now, let's move to the post-adjustment multiplier. So far, we have talked about the post-adjustment index. The post-adjustment index is a statistical index for compensation purposes, and it is a statistical measurement. At the same time, we do have the multiplier, and the multiplier is what you see in your payslip every month, and that is what determines the level of pay. And before we talk about the multiplier, let me just say the pay index is the multiplier plus 100. So when you compare, when you want to make a comparison between multiplier and post-adjustment index, you need to add 100 to the multiplier, because only by adding 100, you have a comparable scale. So let us assume that we run a survey, and when we have this benchmark from the post-adjustment index calculated on the basis of the various components of the survey, so staff expenditures on one side for the wage and market prices on the other side for the indices, when you aggregate all this information together, you come up with the post-adjustment index at the time of the survey. Then we updated that at the time of implementation, which is a few months later, because we need time to collect and clean the data, we need time to process the data. And so some time goes on between survey date and implementation date. That time and what happens in between survey date and implementation date is not lost, in the sense that every inflation that takes place in between these two times is accounted at the end. And every evolution of the local currency or other currencies that take place in between these two times is also accounted for. So we are reaching the time team of survey implementation, and we make a comparison between the post-adjustment index updated at that time and the prevailing pay index. What is the prevailing pay index? The prevailing pay index is the multiplier that we would have calculated for that particular time if no survey was to be implemented at that time. So the prevailing pay index expresses simply the evolution of salary without survey. So we have that type of updating in parallel, and we make a comparison. If the post-adjustment index at the time of implementation is higher than the prevailing pay index, the new PAM, the new multiplier set at that point in time, is going to be post-adjustment index minus 100. And this means increase in net remuneration. That is the best outcome for a survey, an increase in net remuneration. We catch up on the inflation that took place, we catch up on the evolution of currencies, and we end up with a positive result. Everybody's happy. Now, that is one of the three possible outcomes. But it may also turn out that from a survey, the post-adjustment index that is updated to the time of implementation is lower than the pay index, than the prevailing pay index. But the gap between these two, even if the post-adjustment index is lower, if the gap is not that much, if the gap is less than 3%, then we don't implement a lower PAM. We keep using the prevailing pay index, essentially, and there's no change in net remuneration. So when the survey result is negative, but it's not so negative in a way that the gap between what we would need to pay theoretically and what we are actually going to pay in absence of the survey is less than 3%, then there's no change in net remuneration. We implement the post-adjustment index, but the PAM remains that would be applied even without the survey. On the other hand, sometimes survey results are lower, significantly lower than the prevailing pay index. When they are so low that the gap is too high, 3% or higher, then we implement a lower post-adjustment multiplier than the prevailing one, but we have two operational measures in this case. The first is the augmentation of 3%. So say that you have a survey that produces a post-adjustment index that is 5% below the prevailing pay index. Instead of having a multiplier or that is so much lower, we have a multiplier that ensures a pay index that is only 2% lower. So there is an augmentation of 3% of the survey results before determining the new multiplier. And staff that are already at the duty station who are used to the previous level of remuneration, they're given a personal transitional allowance, which is filling the gap between the previously higher level of remuneration and the new lower level of remuneration. We fill the gap with this personal transitional allowance only for existing staff in full for 6 months. So for 6 months, there's no immediate effect of the lower level of remuneration for existing staff. At the 7th month after time of implementation, this PTA is reduced, and depending on the size of the PTA, it is reduced progressively every 4 months until it is phased out. And so if we have a big PTA, it may take long time to reach gradually a landing to a lower level of remuneration to staff, for staff that exist at the duty station. But newcomers are not entitled to the PTA. Newcomers that join the duty station after the implementation of survey results will not receive the PTA. So what are the updating rules for the PAM? So we have seen the benchmarking of the PAM, which depends on the implementation of survey results. But what happens after the implementation of survey results is the updating of the PAM. And this is covered in pages 35 to 39 of the booklet. So pay levels for professional staff are reviewed either when the results of a new survey are implemented or on occasion of periodic reviews, which are conducted with different intervals for Group 1 and Group 2 duty stations. So pay levels in Group 1 duty stations are normally reviewed every 12 months in February. And this was the case for Rome and for every other duty station that is Group 1. The statutory month of review is February of every year. But these reviews are more frequent. They take place every 4 months in March, July, and November for field duty stations. So in between these 4 months, the multiplier is expected to remain the same for field duty stations. But you may notice that in Rome, your multiplier changes from month to month and we're going to see why. At each review, the level of the pay level is determined on the basis of specific operational rules, which consider the effects of inflation and exchange rates. So when February comes every year, we look at the comparison between the post-adjustment index and the prevailing pay index, and the post-adjustment index incorporates, because of the continuing evolution of inflation and exchange rate that is incorporated into it, what has happened in terms of evolution of cost of living at the duty station. So we do have that comparison made. So inflation and exchange rate are both looked at the time of every review. And as you can imagine, when there is positive inflation, this tends to increase the level of cost adjustment. But we had in the past years, now we are having strong inflation, so not as the last year, but still strong. So the PIs are growing generally. But at the same time, we have to look at the strength of the dollar versus the local currency. If the local currency also gains in strength versus the dollar, then that has a boosting effect as well. But the depreciating currency has a depressing effect on the PI. So sometimes, as I said before, these two, inflation and currency effect, they may offset each other in full or in part. And that's a very important point. And another important point to highlight is that operational rules, and we're going to see them in detail now, they operate in an asymmetric manner. When increases are due, there are no limits that are placed on increases. But there are limits with thresholds or mechanisms to absorb in full or in part certain shocks that are in place to limit the decreases. So we have an asymmetric system in terms of determining the multipliers. No limits to increases, but decreases are cushioned, limited, and reduced, depending on the circumstances and the type of duty station. And there are further rules in addition to the normal ones that may be applicable when we have hyperinflation, galloping inflation, or sudden devaluation of local currencies. These rules are essentially designed to keep to ensure a good, say, trade-off between accuracy and stability. We cannot have both at the same time in full. So if we had accuracy 100%, we wouldn't have stability in remuneration. And if we have 100% stability in remuneration, we wouldn't have accuracy. So operational rules operate this trade-off between these two competing objectives. So what are the rules that regulate the evolution of the multiplier for Group 1 duty stations, like Italy, for example? We've got three basic rules. The 12-month rule, 12-month review rule is what I already indicated. In February of every year, the post-adjustment index is checked against the prevailing PAN plus 100. And if the index is higher, there is an increase in PAN. If the index is lower, the prevailing PAN is maintained. So 12-month rule, we review salary levels every February. These reviews may lead to an increase, but they also may lead, depending on the value of the PI, to maintaining the existing level of remuneration. We have a 5% rule that means that if we have galloping inflation within the year, before reaching February of the following year, if we have galloping inflation until October, and we reach an increasing cost of living at the duty station that is 5% or higher, then we make an out-of-cycle review. We make an earlier review before February in case this happens. And this has happened not in all duty stations most recently, but in a number of them. And the last occasion for breaching this threshold of 5% is now in October. And if any of the duty stations that we monitor on a monthly basis will have that increasing cost of living for inflation only at 5% or higher compared to February, then we may have an earlier increase in the multiplier. Otherwise, in between reviews, if there is no earlier effect due to the 5% rule, in between reviews, the multiplier reacts only to fluctuation of the exchange rate in order to keep the net take-home pay in local currency stable within a window of plus or minus 0.5%. That's why it's called 0.5% rule. So we are going to see the example for Rome. Now, here in this evolution of levels of multiplier for Rome between January and September, we're going to see the effect of two of these three rules. The first effect is that of February. What you can see is the application of the 12-month rule, and the multiplier that was set in February, 32.1, was exactly the post-adjustment index minus 100. It was the evolution of the post-adjustment index for Rome was 132.1, and then the multiplier 32.1 in February. So application of the 12-month rule, that application led to an increase in net take-home pay that you can see compared to the level of January. And then what happens is that every other month following February, the multiplier, you can see it changes every month, but the level of local currency, of net take-home pay in local currency is stable. It's not exactly the same number because we have multipliers up to 1 decimal point. So there is a little bit of variation in few more euros, few less euros, but the benchmark that needs to be maintained is that set in net take-home pay in local currency in February. So that is our benchmark. And unless we have an auto-cycle review, that will be maintained until the next February. So $8,083 for a P4 step 6 staff member that receives either dependent spouse or single parent allowance. And in any month following February, the multiplier is set only to achieve that benchmark by reacting to the changes in the exchange rate as promulgated by the UN Treasury. So there's no inflation effect in between reviews. Inflation is considered once a year in February, and in between reviews, your multiplier will change every month to react to the exchange rate, so that if the euro appreciates, you will need a higher multiplier. And if the euro depreciates, you will just need a lower multiplier. But the end level of net take-home pay, which is base salary plus post adjustment minus pension contribution, is going to remain stable. Not exactly the same level, but largely stable throughout the year, even if the multiplier changes. And so that is the 0.5% rule, applied consistently after February until today. And this is about setting and updating post-adjustment indices and multipliers. Now we're going to cover rental subsidy. There was such a request to cover rental subsidy too. And you can see that we cover rental subsidy in our booklet in much deeper level of detail than what I'm going to provide you now in pages 70 to 75 of that.
Roberto, can I just stop you to see if anyone has any questions? Because I think it's a good place to stop.
Okay.
One of the things we've been asked is for the link to the booklet. So please, you could provide us with the link to the booklet.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm going to showcase it at the end of the presentation. I'm going to put it in a very high magnified image of our website. So you can not only see the link, but you can also see where to go even without the link.
yes. So we understand that this presentation is quite technical, and some people may think it's a bit too technical, but it is an important presentation, and you can take from it what works for you. Are there any questions? We've looked at I've looked at the questions in the chat, and the people or most of them are for the booklet, Roberto. So if anybody is there anybody with a question, you can put your hand up. Otherwise, we'll continue to the rental subsidy. Are there any questions? I can't see the hands up, Deborah, so I'll need your help if there are any hands up.
I don't see any. No.
Okay, so let's go on to the rental subsidy.
Yes. And then I will show you the booklet. I will show you
Yes.
where to
Thank
find
you.
it and the link.
Thank you.
So rental subsidy, I'll try to be brief. Rental subsidy is one of those topics that we get a lot of queries, a lot of requests for explanation. I hope that what I'm going to say today is going to clarify a couple of important points. So rental subsidy is a supplement of remuneration given to renters who pay a higher than average proportion of income on rent at a duty station. And higher than average proportion of income means that if every renter in a duty station paid the same share of their income on rent, say everybody, no matter their level of grade, P2 to D2, doesn't matter. Let us imagine that everybody spends 25% of their income on rent. Nobody in that duty station would receive rental subsidy. So rental subsidy is paid only when you pay significantly more than the high average proportion of income that is recorded with survey at the duty station. So that is an essential, important take that we need to clarify because it is designed to work as a supplement of income. If post adjustment was sufficient for everybody to ensure that they were spending exactly the same amount of, not same amount, the same share of income in rent, then there wouldn't be rental subsidy. But this is not the reality. If you have a certain family size with average needs, no matter whether you are a junior staff with a lower grade, or if you are higher level grade, more or less, I mean, yes, there may be some differences, but your needs for housing are fairly similar, given that you've got the same family size, the same household size. So what happens is that staff with lower grades, they tend to spend more than staff on higher grades as a proportion of their income, because their income is lower. They tend to spend more on rents because you cannot choose much in terms of how to spend on rent. You have a little bit of wiggle room in terms of maybe renting in an area that is cheaper, etc. But essentially, given a certain market level for rents in a duty station, your demand for rent is inelastic. You cannot choose to avoid paying rent if you are not the owner of a dwelling. So when you have a lower income, you may than the average or the higher income guys, you spend more on rent, and you are likely to be eligible for rental subsidy in that situation. Whereas if your income is already high and you can support your rent with your income, you are likely to receive less or zero rental subsidy. The same goes for newcomers versus long stayers in a duty station. When you are a newcomer, you know less the market, you are under much more pressure to find an accommodation, and then you end up usually paying more than staff that have already been at the duty station for quite some time. So this is a scheme designed to address that level of inequity that staff are subject to with regard to rent within a duty station. And it is fully integrated within the post adjustment system, but it is not based on a comparison with New York. The only comparison that is made is with the average rent to income at the duty station. And if you go to the booklet, you will see that the way we used to set up the new rental subsidy thresholds when a survey is conducted is by measuring the average rent to income in the duty station. Rental subsidy is not a housing allowance, and by design, and this is the most important point I want to convey, it is inversely correlated to personal income. The more you earn, the less rental subsidy you will receive. And it doesn't matter whether this higher earning comes from a promotion or a step increase or an increase in post adjustment that applies to all in the duty station. If you earn more, this higher earning in level of remuneration is going to cover, if not in full, at least in part, your rental needs. And so rental subsidy is going to decrease. So that is by design. And it was designed back then when this scheme was introduced, even with the stronger inverse correlation than we have today. But still, we do have that inverse correlation. And we are going to see exactly where this operates. So when you want to look at rental subsidy, the important points to determine how much rental subsidy you're going to receive, the important features are the rental subsidy threshold, which then are used to calculate your personal threshold amount by multiplying the rental subsidy threshold to your net remuneration, so base salary plus post adjustment and PTA in case it's payable. You're going to determine your personal threshold amount. A maximum reasonable rent, which is determined by organizations locally. Organizations at the duty station determine what is considered a maximum reasonable rent for different dwelling sizes, and they establish these maxima on the basis of their knowledge of the market. It's not under the responsibility of the ICSC to determine maximum reasonable rents. It is the individual organizations or the organization, hopefully all together or in a coordination, they determine this at local level. Then there is a ceiling. No rental subsidy should be higher than 40% of rent. That is a ceiling that applies to rental subsidy. It was designed long time ago as such and still there as a ceiling. There are some exceptions that are present when there are markets that require lifting that ceiling to 90%. Increasing that ceiling to 90%. And this is when in our circulars, you see that the duty station is under W40. That means waiver of 40%. And we have reimbursement rates that are as with this table. So in group 1 duty stations, newcomers who join the duty station, they are entitled in their first 4 years to a reimbursement rate of 80%. But then the reimbursement rate phases out gradually, going to 60, 40, 20, and then after the 7th year, it goes to 0. Some cases where renters must change a dwelling because they're evicted, or there are some cases what we call force majeure may still remain eligible at even beyond the 7 year, but they are very, very specific cases. Most of the times they don't occur. Whereas in group 2 duty stations, the reimbursement rate remains stable throughout. And we've got to say a few words here. When the rental subsidy scheme was introduced many, many years ago, back in the 80s, this scheme was introduced only in field duty stations. It was later on extended to group 1s at quarter duty stations, but at the beginning it was designed only for field. Then, and in the field, the rationale was that staff are subject to frequent turnover, and so there was no need to set up a reimbursement rate that was decreasing. But when this was introduced in the headquarter duty stations, which have a more stable staff population, then at that point, the choice was made to have a decreasing reimbursement rate. Another thing that I would like to stress is that the ICSC is responsible for the overall policy of this scheme, of the rental subsidy scheme, but there is a certain amount of operational and implementation features. For example, the forms you've got to fill and the individual decisions about what constitutes rents that is subsidizable, etc., are in the hands of certifying officers within each of the organizations. We don't definitely have the capacity to review individual cases. We set up the policy, but the implementation of that policy is with the organizations. So when you want to calculate a rental subsidy, you need to, it's a complex calculation, and it requires knowing a lot of elements and details. We need to know, for example, the grade and step. We need to know the duty station, of course, and the time of calculation. And in addition to this, we need to know the post-adjustment multiplier at the time of calculation. Let's say that we're talking about New York, a P4 step 3, and the calculation has to be made for rental subsidy in March. So we would need to use a multiplier of 80.5. And then we assume that this person has been this person is eligible to a reimbursement rate of 80%. And that means that he's a newcomer, he or she is a newcomer, and with less than 4 years at the duty stations. We can calculate the net base salary for that P4 step 6. We can calculate the dependent spouse single parent allowance that applies in that case. And we can calculate on the basis of the applicable rental subsidy threshold, the personal threshold. And we also have the maximum reasonable rent set up not by the ICSC, but by the organizations in New York for that particular dwelling type and size to which that staff member is entitled. And the formula to calculate rental subsidy is this, essentially. And you need all these parameters to enter in the formula, and then the last element that you need is rent. Rent is a variable that we don't know now, but it could be lower, higher, 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 up to this maximum reasonable rent. And depending on the level of rent, the rental subsidy is going to be different. And this chart shows exactly how rental subsidy relates to rent if you start having a rent that exceeds your personal threshold, because below your personal threshold, which is determined by multiplying your net remuneration with the rental subsidy threshold applicable in general at the duty station, with any rent below your personal threshold, you're not entitled to rental subsidy. And then when you rent, your rent exceed your personal threshold, you're going to receive the minimum between 40% of that rent and 80% of the difference between the rent and the personal threshold, until rent reaches the maximum reasonable rent. At that point in time, no matter whether rent is higher, maximum reasonable rent will replace the use of rent, the actual rent in the formula, and so the rental subsidy stops. When your rent exceeds maximum reasonable rent, rental subsidy stops. So here in this chart, you can see personal threshold. That personal threshold is a function of the rental subsidy threshold that is applicable to every staff in the duty station, but at the same time is a function of your personal income, your net remuneration. So the higher your income, the higher your personal threshold, and the less margin you have for rental subsidy. This is the inverse correlation that I was describing earlier. So if your personal threshold changes, either because there is an increase in post adjustment or because there is an increase in remuneration due to promotion step, etc., then you are going to receive less rental subsidy. So every month, that is the calculation that is provided, and it's not by accident. The scheme was designed to be a supplement of remuneration, but integrated with it in a way that only if you exceed in rent your personal threshold, you will become eligible to a certain amount of rental subsidy. So this is how it works, and this is the end of the presentation. But before I close, I just want to see whether you see the can you see the our webpage?
Yes.
Yes.
Very well. Okay, so now this is the homepage of the ICSC. It's very easy to find around, even though sometimes people, when they Google ICSC, they're routed to the International Council of Shopping Centers, but it's that is another organization. But when you go to our website and you go to resources, or what we do, just go to post adjustment. What we do, post adjustment. Here you will find the booklet in this corner here. On the at this point in this link, we've got publication schedules, the schedules for the service, and we've got the booklet, and this is the booklet. And let me see if, okay, this is the booklet that you have, and the link, I'm going to place it in the chat now. So let me see if I can make it to the chat. Okay, no, I will need to unshare because I don't have through Zoom now the direct access to the chat, but I'm going to post it in the chat as soon as I stop sharing. And this booklet, as I said, has everything that I told you today, explained to you today, and more. So if you really want to know more, just go to our website. You go to our homepage, you follow post adjustment, what we do. You end up on the lower, in the bottom right corner of these quick links, and you get the booklet. It's also accessible from data and reports, where we've got the monthly issuances of new post adjustment numbers in this page, and it's also available. It's linked from there. So and if you want a direct link, I'm going to post it now in the chat here, and here it is. I put it there so you can all go directly to the booklet. And with this, I can stop sharing. And I'm here for questions.
Thank you so much, Roberto. Sophie has her hand up. So Sophie, please go ahead. She's been sharing in the chat as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I try to follow you, but of course, not always 100% sure I got it. So I could see from your previous slides that with your example, the net salary was actually $6,724 US. And actually, in the previous information you send us, housing should be 26.1%. However, the threshold was 4,000. So can you explain what makes such a difference? Because I guess the post adjustment is has something to do. But for me, if you have to have at least a rent above 4,000 to get the rental subsidy, this represents more than 26.1% that you are supposed to put in housing, without even talking about what you could have as housing in your home country. So maybe if you could clarify, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Let me go back to the slide. Let me see that all righty. So share screen. Okay, so this is the slide you were saying.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Because
so,
you see, yeah,
yeah,
you see net
okay.
salary monthly, 6,720.
Yes. So we've got net salary is the net base salary. That is the base salary scale. Okay, 6,724. For a P4 step 3, it's 6,724 US dollars per month everywhere in the world. It's net base salary. But because we are talking of a specific duty station, we need to add post adjustment. Okay, so New York current post adjustment for March 2023 was 80.5, and therefore when you need to add post adjustment, you calculate post adjustment as the element D in this slide, which is net base salary plus the multiplier essentially. Okay, so 80.5 divided by 100. So post adjustment 5,413 adds up to net base salary. And then because we are talking about a staff member that receives dependent spouse or single parent allowance in this particular example, then we need to add 6% of the net remuneration. So net base salary plus post adjustment, and we end up with 728 additional amount in dependent spouse and single parent allowance. So when you add up all these three elements, 6,724, 5,413, and 728, and you take 32% of these of the overall amount, then you get the personal threshold. It's at the second last line. The personal threshold is G is equal to C 6,000 plus D 5,000 plus F plus E, the dependent spouse allowance. You multiply by the threshold, divide by 100, you get the personal threshold. So that is the calculation. So you need to add net base salary, post adjustment, and if you have it, the single parent or dependent spouse allowance. That is what determines the pot of money that determines the personal threshold. Other allowances such as child allowance, whatever mobility people have in the field, hardship, they don't count. What counts in the calculation of rental subsidy as these three elements. Is that sufficiently clarifying?
Well, of course, I was doing an easier calculation because I was additioning or adding all these numbers, and then I was looking what represent 26 point something, which is the house.
No, 32.
And of course, it's not the same. Okay.
Okay. Okay. I mean, we can open Excel and do it. I hope not to have made a mistake, but roughly speaking, let me use my calculator here. Let me see. If I have 6,724 plus 5,413 plus 728, I end up with 12,866, and I take 32% of that, I end up with 4,116.
Okay, but you said 32%, but in the
Yes.
previous document you shared with us, housing was 26.1.
Okay, yeah, that was
So
another
you
example.
see, the difference is that I'm thinking, oh, 26, but actually no, it's 32.
32. In this example, I'm using New York as an example. That previous slide was example. It was another example. I could have used 32. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so it was just to make clarity.
Yeah, it's an unrelated example.
Okay, so how do we know what is the percentage of the threshold in our country? Is that in your booklet?
No, that is here. Let me share my website. Okay. Okay. So when you are in our website and you go to data and reports and you go to post adjustment, you end up in this page. Okay. So when you look at the schedule of classifications, and you open this menu here, September 2023, SERPAC 585, but then we've got the SERPAC for every month. We updated them in the middle of the month after we run the updating calculations. You open this up and it gives you what are updates for the current month for all duty stations. First, there is a narrative part at the beginning where you do have information about new surveys that are implemented, new measures that are implemented, and any other narrative information that we need to report. And then there is this big table, Consolidated Post-Adjustment Circular, the annex table that provides post-adjustment classification information on a monthly basis for every duty station. So when you go to the right hand, you see the rental subsidy thresholds applicable to staff with this dependent spouse or single parent allowance or without that. And when these were set, at which point in time these were revised, and they are revised on the occasion of a survey, potentially, not always, depending on the survey results. But here you can see them all. So, for example, in the case of Italy, again, these thresholds are 21 and 22%. So they are the ones that are to be used for the calculations of rental subsidy. But when you look at other places, they may be different. They may be higher or lower, depending on the average rent to income at the duty station, plus other considerations. In New York, in fact, what you can see is that these thresholds are 32 and 34. It's one of the highest, but probably not the highest. I don't know all these numbers by heart, but the maybe other places with higher rental subsidy thresholds. To be seen. But generally they are lower than New York. New York is one of the highest that you can have.
Sophie, does that explain?
Yeah.
Roberto,
Very good.
sorry.
Thank you so much.
György Kisi speaking from SSC. Robert, you may show to Sophie just to sharing the screen, and on the first page on your homepage, the map it's showing, and if she opts for the duty station, her own duty station, then can see immediately this threshold.
Oh, yes, yes.
Without going to this, all of this, because maybe it's too complicated and it's easier.
Okay, yes, you're very right.
Thanks.
Thank you for pointing me to that. I always forget the homepage and the
Yeah,
map.
because you are working on another side, but if you are working from the client, it's easier.
So let me show you this. So when you go to our homepage, some very quick information about the country is available, or more specifically, a duty station is available within our map. When you're here and you browse through the map, you can actually get not everything, but a good chunk of information. For example, in Italy, you can see what are the rental subsidy thresholds exactly when you look at the post-adjustment tab. But you can also see the daily subsistence allowance rates, hardship classification, which is not there. Danger pay, of course, doesn't apply, and non-family duty station doesn't apply. But if you are anywhere like in other countries, India, you can get post-adjustment DSA hardship classification for a number of locations and danger pay or other things. So whether applied to not or not, you can have a very quick view of these primary elements of compensation, the primary parameters for the elements of compensation of staff from the map. Thank you very much for pointing this out. I always forget about it.
We have Musa. Musa, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Roberto and colleagues, for organizing this session. Even though there's a lot of formula in the presentation. That anyway, I've been able to follow part of the presentation, and I have two questions. The first one is related to the rental subsidy. I think if I'm not wrong, you just confirmed that there's a ceiling when it's come to rental subsidy. It means that when we are in a D2 station and the D2 station is entitled to a rental subsidy, and then based on the calculation that they made, you can pay like up to let's say up to $2,000 for part of your salary. And then for me, I was expecting that I found a house, and the UN coordinator or the FAO confirmed that because this is the process in terms of getting the rental subsidy. They sign and confirm that the house that you take is fit with your family, blah blah, and so on. Apparently, some agencies, some UN agencies are not selling that the rent. I'm talking about the rent. I'm taking the case. Let's say they say, okay, you can pay up to $2,000 from your salary based on the calculation. And yes, I was expecting that, okay, I can pay up to $2,000, but the house that I found is $4,000. Let me say $4,000. Then I was expecting that 4,000 minus 2,000, I have 2,000 difference. The 2,000 difference, 80% would be paid by my organization. But what I understood that they say no, they cannot pay the difference. They will pay a certain percentage or part of the difference, because they put a ceiling. You are not allowed to go up to a certain level of the rent that we find in the country. That's what I've been told, here. And then when I was discussing with some of our colleagues from other UN agency, they told me that no, there's no ceiling with regard to the rent. I'm just confused. Is it FAO that is doing something particular, or what's happening? Or is it up to any UN agency to decide on sealing the rent or not sealing the rent when it's come to rental subsidy. I don't know if you got my point.
I understand what you say, but I cannot be of much help, I tell you, because as I said at the beginning, I can cover the overall policy, but the actual implementation of this scheme and the calculations behind and the determination of these maximum reasonable rents, etc., are all in the hands of certifying officers of the organizations. So I can tell you how it works in general, policy-wise, but I don't have neither the information nor the mandate to operate the check on individual cases. So for any, what I can say in general, policy-wise, is this: when we have situations that see organizations coordinating among themselves in the duty station and establishing common maximum reasonable rents, that's the ideal. That's the ideal situation, because every staff are entitled, no matter which organization they work for, they are entitled to the same maxima. But sometimes this coordination is either not needed or is not followed because either the duty station is so small that actually there is no need for a formal mechanism of coordination, and the responsibility of how to consider reasonable a rent, how much reasonable is a rent, is still in the hands of certifying officers. Essentially, when maximum reasonable rents are determined duty station-wise, this lifts that type of evaluation from the individual certifying officers to a common and agreed upon coordination mechanism that of the organization in the same duty station. It's something that happens that adds a layer of, I would say, fairness and objectivity. But in some situations, and I cannot judge by myself when this does not take place, it doesn't take place because either it's too small to have such a formal mechanism, or because I don't know why the organizations don't have a coordination among themselves in the duty station. It's something that we do not have as a part of our policy, is the determination of the maximum reasonable rents. So it's in the hands of the organizations locally. So
Thank you, Roberto. I don't know if there's anyone from HR attending this who could answer that question, because we usually partner with HR. Yeah, Georgie is here from HR. There she is. She's going to be able to give us that answer. So Musa, I'll ask her to answer on HR's behalf.
So good afternoon, everyone. So yes, the rental subsidy here in the SSC, where we are establishing the maximum reasonable rent, then we are using, I know that it's a type of unique way, but how the rules are saying, we are using the ICSC living allowance survey just to get an impression. And then there are certain duty stations, for example, in New York, Rome, duty stations where we have a pre-established ceiling, so there is nothing to do with that one. There we apply that one. But for those who are in the field location, we are using the ICSC website for the living allowance, and then we are adding, make a comparison on the size of the dwelling, which is established. The size of the dwelling which is established is depending on the size of the family. So the rooms are established, and then it's quite a complicated calculation. And then we are adding 50% to the amount what we can find on that webpage, and that's the maximum reasonable rent what we are paying. But for example, if there is an apartment and a house, and you have the sufficient number of family members living with you at the duty station, which qualifies you to have a 4 bedrooms house renting, and then we are compare the house renting and the apartment renting, which is the higher of the two, and we are applying the higher of the two, but we can't apply anything else from the list. So the determination depends on the size of the family and the members of the family who are living with you at the duty station. And then in addition, for the amount, we are using this living allowance survey, the latest one all the time for the amount. Is it responding to you?
Yes, more or less, yes, because, sorry, thank you very much for this explanation. But what I was just confused because when I was discussing with other colleagues from other UN agencies, that's why I'm trying to just understand. What you just said, Mr. Georgie, is it only FAO that what does this? Or is it all UN agency? Because when it's come, I went to the system, I saw they did some kind of survey, define all the conditions in the country. But the colleague from other agency that I don't want to give the name, they told me that no, once we agree, they don't seal, you know, the amount of the rent. They pay 80% of the surplus, you know, and then the officer pays 20%. Is it only FAO? Because the colleagues send me the information and all this. Okay, I was a bit surprised, but just to understand, is it only FAO or is this a common UN system?
As far as I know, it's just the FAO, and this rule was established. So in the it is written in the manual now in the handbook, and it's changed a couple of years ago. And then it was a huge difference between the former formula because it was more aligned with the other agencies. But now FAO deviate in this regard based on higher management decisions.
Thank you very much. My second question, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Okay, please. Thank you very much. You see, compared to other agencies, it look like FAO is not attractive. You know, when you use even this one, it's something that's very. It was a bit complicated anyway. The second one is I don't know if you touch on this one. When you move or when you have been appointed as staff member or you move from one duty station to another duty station. I didn't know if this was part of also the presentation, but FAO does not allow to give any, how to call it, allowance in terms of the movement of effects. I can decide to move my effects from one duty to another station. If you decide not to move it, you cannot get any money. Compared to other agencies where you can decide to move your staff or to get a lump sum to go and sell and buy new thing or something like that. Sorry, since you are all here, then I want just to understand because other people they say, "Oh, FAO, why are you like that? You are very stingy." I'm sorry.
I know, because we are getting these questions time to time, and then it's very different. Other agencies are other agencies, and FAO is FAO. So why I understand that it could be great that it's more harmonized and we are paying the same allowances or the allowances are harmonized all over the agencies. But FAO is not paying. FAO is paying the travel and the shipping entitlement, but we are not paying a lump sum type of amount. And then if you are moved to another duty station, then you are receiving the settling in grant at the new duty station. So that's the payment, and the shipping can be changed to a lump sum payment. Shipping is not a financial entitlement. It's the service itself what you are getting. So if you are not moving your stuff, then you are not getting any allowance apart from the settling in grant.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Let me add one thing about the policies on rental subsidy. When it comes to this determination of the maximum reasonable rent, there's no way that this was like set with a prescriptive methodology by the ICSC, but the ICSC indicated that when this scheme was made back then in the 80s and introduced in the system, there is a requirement by the certifying officer for the rent that is subsidized to be considered reasonable. And of course, now at that time when they designed the policy, what is reasonable in a place may be unreasonable in another. So it's a very heterogeneous set of market conditions, etc. So it's very difficult to make a determination that is from that viewpoint that applies to all situations. So that's the value of the work of the certifying officers, so that in the end they sign off on a rent that is considered reasonable or not. And they do, but because we are in separate organizations, it is the responsibility of each of these organizations to act when there is no overall coordination at the duty station. So if there is that, but that is a requirement to certify that the rent is a reasonable one is a requirement policy-wise. Just to say that whatever the determination of this maxima is for the individual organizations, in having this maximum set, I think they are applying the policy correctly.
Thank you, Roberto. Are there any other questions? We are going to have a session on repatriation grants. So Musa, I hope you'll attend that and you can ask these questions again, because your last question was about repatriation and settling in grants. And so it's slightly different. But I think if there are no more questions, I really would like to thank Roberto for this presentation. It was detailed, yes. Lots of calculations, yes. But I think it's very helpful. I was just going to ask Georgie to introduce yourself, because you are from HR and we are doing this with as a triangle. We have ICSC and we have HR to clarify our questions within the organization. So please introduce yourself so that they know you're here.
Yeah, okay. So this is the first time that I am participating in this type of meeting. I am a national HR officer in the Shared Service Center in Budapest, and I am operating in the staff servicing team, assisting both the onboarding, transfer and separation team, and also the entitlement and benefits team. And then I'm participating very much in the reviewing of the rental subsidies, even the calculations and the Excel files and all of the lovely stuff what we are doing. And then, so I am assisting in this team 15 years now, so it's quite a long period. And then I am witnessing all the changes and then the impact on colleagues and then, however, sometimes I fully understand their concerns, and we are trying to do the best to have what we have, but still, how it's said, we have to harmonize our work in line with the rules. And however, there are some scenarios where there are deviations because of the circumstances. The organization always consider such deviances. So it's not about that we are too strict, but yeah, in a nutshell. So I'm just participating there, and I love my work very much, and I'm happy to assist all the colleagues. And some of the colleagues, I know them, and I met them, and I have issues with the rental subsidy or other entitlements.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
We haven't met in person, but you've looked at my case a lot of times, Georgie. So I know that
Yeah.
you've seen my name before. So I want to thank everybody for attending. We will be circulating the presentation that was made. This recording will be on our intranet site. And Roberto is just arranging with his other colleagues in ICSC. So we will let you know about other dates of the other topics that people wanted to have. And we will update you on those dates as soon as Roberto and I facilitate that process. But we really would like to thank you. Thank you for attending. Thank you to Roberto for your time. I know it's early in New York. I hope you've had your coffee. And then to Georgie, thank you so much for being here. And to everybody who was here, we look forward to the next presentation. Please go to our website. This is now the fourth one we've done. If you think this one was quite complicated, please look at the very first one we had, where Roberto and Line gave a very broad presentation, and that will help. So thank you very much to everyone, and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.